Hello and welcome back to the Business Matters Spotlight. My name is Warren Coughlin. We've recently had the good fortune of having a number of guests who are B Corps, and it's not that you have to be a B Corp in order to do good in the world, but generally people who are B Corps are people who want to do that, which is why I've had them on the show. Well, today we get to talk about the very first ever B Corp. Unfortunately, the founder has passed on, but his legacy remains in both a business and a foundation that try to do things just a bit differently. And this is a travel business. And one of the reasons I really wanted to have this guest on the show is I love the style of travel they offer and think more people should know about it. The business is known as Untours, and most recently at the helm is Jonathan Coleman. Jonathan, welcome to the Spotlight.
Hi, Warren. Really happy to be here.
Oh, glad to have you. Now, normally I start with a bit of a dive into the personal background of the guest, and I do want to get to that with you. But because of the unique status of this organization, I thought it may be fun to start at the beginning. Where did Untours come from? How did it become the first B Corp? And what was Daniel, the founder's sort of original vision?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the founder was Hal.
Yeah,
Hal Taussig was his name. So yeah, I can walk you through that history, which provides important context, of course, for what we do today in the present. So Hal Taussig was started Untours in the mid-'70s, and it was kind of his second or third career. So he had been a rancher for a while, and then moved on to being a professor, and then he started Untours, a bit later in life. And his whole idea was that he would help people travel more slowly, travel more immersed in local communities. He had a few iterations that led to kind of what the Untour became, but that was always his goal. And so, in the 70s, he started helping mostly Americans travel to Europe, and to have kind of longer stays in one place in Europe instead of the traditional European tour, which is a few nights here and a few nights there and bouncing around all over. He set the company up and to highlight the value and the benefit of traveling more slowly, of embedding oneself in a local community, of getting to know that local community and kind of going deeper into one place as opposed to just skimming the surface over many places. And so that was like from a travel ideology, that was kind of the perspective from the beginning of what Untours was about. But then it was also overlaid with that this kind of sustainability ideology, which is the value of slower travel, the value of embedding into a local community, spending your money into local establishments, primarily renting lodging from local residents. All of that was fit with Hal's mantra of trying to use his business as a force for good and use travel and tourism as a force for good as well. So those are kind of the tenets that the Untours was built on back in the 70s. And so also just to highlight that the primary form of lodging from an Untour, again, back all the way into the 70s, was a home or apartment in a neighborhood or in a village or small town throughout Europe. So this was happening before the guys that founded Airbnb were born. And Untours was offering one of the few places, certainly, that were offering a non-hotel style stay for travelers in Europe, and certainly those that were like embedded in local communities. So, there in those days there were like the holiday rental or the holiday home rental like world did exist, but this kind of more like in neighborhoods and in towns and this kind of thing, it was very, very rare. And so Untours was very much ahead of its time in thinking about that. Anyway, so that's from the beginning. Fast forwarding to the early 90s, Untours started to make a bit of money, started to become a nice, successful small business. And Hal himself, on top of being this kind of visionary of what he thought travel could be in the world, and at the really cutting edge as an American entrepreneur and thinking about like the role of his business in society and how his business could make society and communities better. He also himself had taken a vow of poverty, committed to having no money. He lived it. He lived on his. Here in the U.S., we have Social Security payments, which tend to be very meager kind of public pension, and he lived on that for his last decades of life, and took $0 ever out of Untours, out of the travel company. But it started making some money, so he needed to do something with it. Right. And so he eventually set up Untours Foundation to take all of the profits of Untours Travel. So that happened in 1993. I believe is when that was.
There's a story about him that's kind of interesting, that his lifestyle choice was so unusual that the IRS didn't believe it. Is that?
That's right. I could spend our time together giving stories I've heard about Hal and his interesting decisions over the year, and the way that he actually lived out his life in crazy ways, and his kind of commitment in life. But so yes, one of those is that the IRS came to Hal and actually did an investigation and fined him because they were sure that because he was taking no money out of the company, that and not taking himself a salary because he had zero salary coming out, that he was somehow defrauding the IRS. And so what they eventually did is made him pay a fine and forced him to take a salary from Untours. And so he would take a salary, he would receive his paycheck, and every time upon receiving his paycheck, he would immediately write the same paycheck amount over and make it as a donation to the foundation. So this was his kind of way around it, to where he would follow this commitment that he made to to live a very simple, austere life.
It's kind of fascinating that in our society you actually get penalized for
being too generous.
For not taking
he was literally
money.
Too generous for the tax authorities. They didn't know what to do with him.
How cynical do we have to be that we just can't believe someone wants to do good? And it wasn't he didn't eat. He had savings from his previous businesses and things too, right?
No, he didn't. He lived a very, very simple life. He gave away his car to a hitchhiker one day, and he never drove again. Only rode his bike around, which cut some costs for him, but also he kind of fit within his lifestyle. He did own a home, but a very, very simple, small ranch home in his hometown. There's multitude of stories. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to tell another.
Yeah.
He was nominated for an award for the most generous businessman in America. This is somewhere around the year 2000. And the award was given by JFK Jr., John F. Kennedy Jr., before he passed away, and Paul Newman, who was kind of a famous business philanthropist. Hal was a
relatively well-known actor too.
Exactly, a few folks, and Hal and Untours are up against kind of some major corporations that have big philanthropic efforts. Anyway, they had an award ceremony at a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, and Hal sitting at a table with JFK Jr. and Paul Newman and the CEO of Home Depot, or a few of these others that were nominated for this award, and JFK Jr. hears that Hal wasn't actually staying at the hotel where they were having the award ceremony, because Hal was infamous for going to events and always staying at a hostel and renting a bike and riding his bike to wherever he needed to go. So he would refuse to stay at the conference hotel, or in this case the hotel, the fancy hotel where they're having the event. So JFK Jr. Told Hal, "Look, I'm so sorry my people didn't get you a room for tonight. Please, we'll take care of that tonight. You'll stay here tonight." And Hal told this JFK Jr., right, one of the most famous men in the world at this point in his life, and he said, when everyone in New York has a warm place to sleep, then I'll sleep here in your fancy hotel. Until then, I'm happy in the hostel down the street.
He was the definition of an iconoclast.
Yes, yeah. So anyway, that's the story of Hal and Untours. In the beginning.
So then he passed away, and so what was the journey to you taking the helm?
Yeah, well, I think an important stop along the way is that because of the way that Untours had embedded social good into how it operated and into what it was doing with the profits, that caught the eye of the founders of the B Corp movement. So this was in the kind of mid 2007 is when it was kind of finalized. But they were looking at Untours as one of their examples as they were framing out what the B Corp movement would become, and what the assessment process would be. And so they became the founders of the movement, the B Corp movement, became quite close with Hal in that process, and actually invited Hal and Untours to go through the certification process to become the world's first ever B Corp. So that is kind of how that came to be, because Hal had gained a bit of a name for himself because he was so committed and extreme in how he lived his life and operated his business, that they wanted to bestow the honor of the world's first B Corp over to him. And so we went through the process, of course, passed the assessment and scored high enough to get that certification. So that happened in 2007.
And was there any kind of like celebration or PR, or like how big a deal was it to be the first B Corp?
Well, now it's a bit of a bigger deal than it was then. I think no one really knew what the B Corp movement was going to become, and it has become something of real substance. Now, 15 years later. But in those days, there is a group of founding B Corps that I don't know how many count themselves 20 or 30 founding B Corps that were the first ones to go through, and they're all quite proud of that achievement. We are all quite proud of that. But I don't know that there was a lot of fanfare because it was nothing when it started, right? It was just an idea in the brains of these founders who then kind of went on to put the infrastructure behind it to make it what it has become. So that kind of leads us to today and the more recent times where, as you mentioned, Hal passed away, and he was quite old by that time, in his mid-90s, and he passed away in 2016, I believe was the year, and his last act of radical generosity was to transfer ownership of Untours travel company to Untours Foundation. So what had been a monetary financial relationship always, where the profits would go over, now the company is 100% owned by the foundation.
Nice. Was that a surprise, or had that been known to people that he was going to do that?
That was always in the plans. It was him and kind of the workers in the family, and always had known that was his wish, that that commitment would carry on in perpetuity by kind of an ownership transfer.
And so there was the idea that then the profits from Untours would just naturally flow up to the foundation.
Yes, exactly. So of course, some profits need to be retained for business growth or reserves and this kind of stuff. But when there was no owner to take the profits, no human owner to take the profits. In the same way, he himself skewed all those profits and donated them to the foundation. The things that the money would have typically gone to him. Now it's in a similar way. The money that would typically go to an owner or owners of a company, as in the form of dividends or owner withdrawals or whatever, just go straight to the foundation.
Nice. So how did you get within the orbit of this? Like, did you know about it all the way along, or what's your history to?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So I grew up in a, relatively poor household in southern Missouri, a small town. My family didn't travel. It just wasn't part of my life growing up, or the culture that I was in. But I did an internship in undergrad, working for a nonprofit in the Dominican Republic for one summer. And it was kind of my first time on an airplane. I was 21 years old, my first time out of the country. And that, of course, opened my eyes to the world, because I was my first time in the world and outside of my own little Midwest bubble. And so that kind of set me on a journey of working for international nonprofits through most of my 20s. So my first job then out of college was back in Dominican with the same organization, and then moved to Africa and Middle East and had a role there. And eventually ended up back in the US in Philadelphia for grad school, doing an MBA focused on social impact. So my mindset for me was how to transition from traditional aid and charity in that world, the nonprofit world, into the world of using business to solve those same kind of problems that I was trying to solve in the nonprofit. So that's where I felt that I fit better, and I felt it had more.
Now, can I pause you there and just ask the question, why? Because it's it's very interesting the way you just framed that, and I'm just curious, why did you feel the need to move from the nonprofit to the for-profit model? Did you feel there was a break in the system in the nonprofit, or was there just higher leverage, or was it just more fun? What was the need for the shift?
Yeah, it's a bit of, I think a combination, a bit of just my own personal desire and proclivity towards the business side of the world, and the kind of the economic side, and viewing the world through that lens. And then also the I think more natural impact that comes from businesses solving the problems, as opposed to charities or nonprofits that tend to have this kind of funky power dynamics, and between where the money is coming from and who the money is serving, and certainly, which I found myself in the middle of it as a young white American guy in Africa, trying to manage budgets with people who had much more authority to be managing budgets than I did, but I just happened to be the one representing the organization on the ground. And it was quite complicated and sticky. But then also, so in a business relationship is a bit more natural because there's customers and there's buyers and there's employees and it feels a bit the power dynamics are a bit different and more comfortable for me.
Right.
And additionally, there's just limits to what the philanthropy or government assistance out there, and essentially the economy and the economic power has no limits for what it can do for good or ill. And so you don't have to put a cap on like how much can you go out and fundraise in a year. There are limits to that, and there really aren't. If you can develop a good business model that has the right, right price point for the right customers, you can. There's no limits on how far you can go, and that was exciting for me.
Cool. Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because someone listening to this could be thinking we're advocating for a particular kind of position. I'm a big believer in kind of an ecosystem model rather than either. Like, there's role for government, there's role for civil society, there's role for charities and nonprofits, and there's role for private. And instead of I always just bristle a little bit when and it's funny. I've often said overtly that I believe that entrepreneurship is one of the most powerful forces for positive social change. And I believe that, but I say one of the most, because the others play really pivotal roles. There's things where business is not the ideal vehicle. Is that a fair?
Well, 100%. 100%. I'm in full agreement with that. There are certain things that charities or governments should control, or should be the ones to solve the problems. It's just there's not the right place for a business to come in and solve that many problems.
Right.
But there are many where business can and should to relieve the burden on government and to relieve the burden on the nonprofit sector.
100%.
And so that's where I wanted to spend my time.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So then you came in, and so how did you, what was the impact you started to have or that you needed to have, or I guess at a certain level, so we know why you went there. Why did the foundation feel the need to bring you in? What was happening that they said we better bring some young hotshot in to drive the ship?
Not quite so young anymore, and maybe never a hotshot. But in the interim between when I finished grad school and ended up at Untours and the Untours Foundation, there was a 7-year gap. And that's where I was working. Actually, I found myself back in the nonprofit space, but on the kind of the business side. So kind of the business support services and funding side, but through a nonprofit vehicle, which is not what I thought I would do after doing an MBA, but it's where I ended up. And so I ended up co-leading an organization that supported entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs and diverse entrepreneurs through training and lending, and was doing that. It turns out I needed to move closer to family to help with some family health issues with my wife's family, which meant I needed to leave that job. But while I had been working on that, my wife and I, and she also has a bit of a global background, had launched a little travel company on the side, impact-driven travel company doing small group immersive travel. And so we were dabbling in tourism. And meanwhile, I was spending my day job supporting entrepreneurs, creating solutions to problems in our community. So
pause there just for a sec. I know I'm going a little bit tangential, but it's just an interesting thing. So we've mentioned the foundation, but not what it did. So you were how is it supporting businesses in the local community? That's an interesting.
I was realizing I needed to get back to that point because we missed it in the timeline.
But it's a really interesting structure, right? We've got a for-profit business that's funding a foundation, and then that foundation is providing funds to other businesses, and I think that's an interesting story. Just unpack a little.
And so that's how House wanted to set up the foundation from the beginning. Again, back in the early '90s, he wanted to use the foundation to support businesses, to create new businesses like Untours that embedded the values and embedded social impact and positive impact into their business models. He wanted to find those and provide funding to help them grow.
And they weren't just travel businesses, right?
No, across all industries. In fact, it wasn't until the last year or two where we have now kind of a carve out of travel focus within the foundation, but otherwise we're industry agnostic. So the foundation was set up from the beginning to support entrepreneurs and businesses around the world that are solving big problems and doing amazing things. But one of the things that makes the foundation, as unique as the company Untours is the world's first B Corp and was at the cutting edge of using business as a force for good and how to do that. The foundation was really at the cutting edge of what we now would call the mission-aligned investing movement within foundations, where the traditional paradigm on foundations is that they have an endowment. That endowment lives in traditional stocks and bonds and investments. And then by law here in the US, 5% of that endowment is required to be used for the mission. That's where the grants come out of most foundations. They do grant making with 5% of their money. The 95% of those assets of that money lives in traditional investments, completely disconnected from the mission, usually. Many times in contrast to the mission, where you have an environmental foundation solving environmental problems and investing all of their money in fossil fuels and environmentally harmful investments. So there's a complete disconnect. Hal thought that was crazy. He wanted all of his assets that he was donating to be connected to his mission. So he basically set up the foundation endowment as a revolving impact fund. So the impact that we make as a foundation is through how we invest our endowment, basically. And our endowment is quite modest, but it is essentially a revolving impact fund that invests primarily low interest loans and flexible loans, some other types of equity investments if it makes the most sense. And that's what we do. So since the early 90s, we've been doing that. And as far as we know, we're the first foundation anywhere to have 100% of our assets, 100% of our endowment directly invested in our mission, without kind of separating that disconnect between endowment and
when you say invested, is that only invested in like recipients of benefits from the foundation, or is there part of the endowment that is invested in stocks and bonds but mission aligned businesses?
No, it's actually all of ours are direct investments into businesses that are on the ground solving problems. So we don't, outside of a very small investment we're using to do some shareholder advocacy work. So there's some like strategic investments in that sense, but the vast majority is kind of directly invested into smaller growing businesses that we know, that we have done our due diligence on, and we have made a loan or other type of investment.
Right. So overall, like that's just such, and the entire model is so innovative, which is one of the reasons I was really happy to have you on. Is like, we got a for-profit enterprise that takes 100% of its profits, put it into a foundation. That foundation then does not do endowments into non-values aligned organizations, but put 100% of the money into other mission aligned organizations. So it's this sort of ethical vertical alignment that is really unusual, but I like, but it's possible. And this is one of the reasons I love doing this podcast, is people are doing things that other people say can't be done. And the fact that it is being done, even though, you said it's a modest endowment, it's still doing it. And so there are for-profit businesses who are striving to do good, who are able to do that because the foundation exists, because Untours exists. And that
exactly,
that's got to feel pretty good when you get up in the morning.
It's what drew me in. It's why I wanted to take on the challenge, and I'll talk a bit in a minute about the challenges that we're facing and have faced over the previous few years at Untours and the foundation. But what drew me in was that history, was that like powerful dynamic of these two sides of the same coin doing, amazing work on the travel foundation or in the travel company, amazing work on the foundation, and linking them together. And I should be clear is, if you have listeners that aren't able to do what Hal did, which was to make zero money, to live off almost nothing.
Not that many can do that.
I want to be clear. Like, I have a young family. I have a mortgage. I have student loans. I need a salary, right?
Right.
So I am not in a place where I'm able to make that same kind of commitment that Hal did with his life. So we have to kind of acknowledge that not everyone is able or is in a place in life where they can do that or should do that, but we can still embed this kind of model in such a way that has the same levels of impact, but like also people get paid,
right.
and that's has to be part of the model if we're going to, for us or for me, if I'm going to be involved, because I can't live off nothing.
But I think, I don't think anyone should even be apologetic for that. Like Hal's an unusual beast, and wonderful that he can. But if we're in a market system that is supposed to be an exchange of value, then my view would be that Untours not only providing value to customers, but providing more value for the community and for other organizations. So it's creating more value. So should be receiving more value, not less. Like, I think there's a mythology out there that in order to be seen as a good person, you have to be self-sacrificing. And I don't, that might be an interesting philosophical conversation to have, but I don't, in a system that's supposed to be value for value, I don't think that you need to be impoverished in order to validly be doing good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Of course, there are like within reason and within limits of kind of that is my perspective on it would be, but we're certainly far from the limits of maximizing exactly. our personal incomes here in Untours land. So yeah. Yeah, I think we're
so sorry. I took you off on a tangent. Part of it was like, so why did the foundation say, okay, there's this guy working in the foundation, we got to put him in the CEO seat of the actual business?
Yeah, so I was hired to co-lead the foundation, which owned the company, and and again, the foundation is doing the core programmatic work of the foundation is very similar to what I had been doing before. So and at that time, I actually joined as part of my role as CEO of the foundation or co-CEO of the foundation. I joined the board of the travel company. So there were some other board members that were from the foundation that acted as like a sub board for the for-profit corporation. And it just became really evident. Well, I started asking some questions early on, and one of the reasons that they also wanted to bring in some help for the long-term leader of the foundation is that the foundation was built on a business model that required revenue from the company for the foundation to pay its bills and to have its impact to replenish the loan fund and these kind of things. And the profits stopped coming. And so I was hired to revamp the business model of the foundation, really, to turn it into more of a fundraising entity so that we could raise the money to keep growing our impact. Because it had been a long time since the company had actually transferred profits over, because it had been a long decade of struggle. And that was before COVID. So travel companies all got hammered in COVID.
Right.
But we went into COVID and really from a position of weakness and a decade of decline before COVID. So what I began to realize really early on into my leadership at the foundation was, okay, I need to work on revamping the business model of the foundation. But we also have this amazing asset, which is a really cool travel company that used to have not massive scale, but a scale enough to be a meaningful contribution, really meaningful contributions to the foundation. And it also has its place in the history of the ethical business movement, we can't bear the responsibility of letting this thing die. And it was on that way, it was heading that direction. So it hadn't been profitable in over a decade, had shrunk to about a quarter of its peak size. And so it was, really struggling. Which, as we all know, just because you have a business with good values doesn't mean it's a business that's making good business decisions, right? And you have to have both of those for the business to be around. And they haven't been able to figure out their place in the market as the travel world changed. Airbnb came around, and now everyone was traveling in the way that Untours was facilitating travel. And so it needed some refreshed lens on things, and the board began to see that as well. And so they had to make some hard decisions around transferring some long-term leadership out of leadership and helping hopefully in a positive way that transition to take place so that could move into a new era. And so part of that transition was in transitioning me to kind of split my time between the foundation and the travel company. And so that happened a little over a year ago, where now I split my time and helped to revamp the travel company into what it was into what it can be in the future, while at the same time continuing the progress of the foundation, which is kind of outpacing the company at this point as far as growth and the ability to think big, because the travel company is still in kind of the throes of cleaning up a lot of deferred maintenance and setting the stage for growth. We're still setting that stage now, and the foundation.
let's talk a little bit about the tour business, because
Mhm.
you just made the comparison to Airbnb, but there are differences to this, and it's again, one of the reasons I love it. I like to travel by immersing myself in a local community. I don't love just hanging out at an international resort and staying by the pool. Like to just immerse myself in the community is what I've always done. And
Mhm.
it's not just having an apartment in the local community. There's some light. I don't even know it's light. I mean, it's light or heavy programming or guiding, but the Untours, it's not a tour, but you can, like, I'm trying to describe it. You unpack it a little bit more, but I think there's a
Yeah.
distinction there that's super important and
Mhm.
high value for people who want to travel that way.
Yeah, and I probably should have just went straight to those technicalities of what is an untour. I should have done that at the beginning. So thanks for bringing us back
No
to it.
worries.
But an untour is, um, yeah, it's a, as you said, it's more than just lodging, and
Mhm.
it's trying to create an alternative to what it would typically be a tour. Where you're traveling with a group of people together, and you have this set itinerary, or by yourself or with others, and you have a set itinerary, and you're following along kind of a plan, a set plan. And the untour is kind of the opposite of that. So when you book an untour, what comes with that package is lodging, pre-vetted, always an apartment or a home or a place with like a bedroom and a living area and a kitchen. Um, Transport, so whatever is most appropriate in the local environment. So it's either rail pass. We prefer to do it that way. It's more environmentally sustainable, and it's a nicer way to get around, especially in Europe. But sometimes a rental car is what's needed in more rural destinations. Um, and most importantly, there's real human support. So there's pre-trip support from our headquarters staff, helping to think about all the things that you need to think about when planning a trip. But then on the ground, when you arrive, we ensure that you have kind of safe handling from the airport to your lodging place. We stock the fridge before you get there, so there's some basic necessities there, so you don't have to immediately go out and find food for yourself. And we have what we call unguides, so not guides, but unguides, who are our local hosts in all of the communities where we send our travelers. And those unguides are the key. They're what makes Untours really special. Most of the rest of it is logistics, and kind of some assurance, that some pre-vetted logistics that we handle. But then the unguides are really special. We call them unguides because the vast majority of them are not tourism professionals. They're just people who live in a
Mhm.
community and are happy to share it. And of course, we pay them for their work, but they are the local hosts. So when you arrive, typically the next day after you arrive in your destination, you do an orientation session with the unguide. They sit down with you over coffee or a drink or a meal, and give you the tips and tricks around town, tell you what festivals are happening or what are the unique things that are happening in the week or two that you're in town. Explain how to get around on transport and how it all works. Explain, here's what the tourists do, here's where the locals go, take your pick, which one you want to do. And then they're a phone call away or a text message or WhatsApp message away at all times during the trip. So it's basically kind of a built-in best friend who's part of your package that's there for you to give advice, to help if there's any trouble, and to be kind of a safety net in that sense. But mostly it's about just giving tips and tricks and advice along the way. And it makes it really much easier to have your trip. And then you do what you want. The only other thing that we schedule during the week is one other weekly activity that's optional. But it's cool. It's like a unique thing that you wouldn't be able to find on your own, typically. And so maybe in Provence in France, it's playing pétanque or like bowls with like at a local center, with local folks, or maybe it's like cooking at the mother's house of the unguide in Andalusia, or like some things that you just find in a guidebook. But that's the only other planned activity during the week. And otherwise, you do your own thing. You set your itinerary. You wake up in the morning and you decide, just what do we want to do today? And then you go do it. And so that's, people love that. It makes it,
I think that is
a really unique offering.
So it gives, at a philosophical level, like, we go deep, but we live in a time where there are social divisions. And I've always been a believer that travel is an antidote for any kind of prejudice. Like you can't dislike people when you're in their community and see how wonderful it is. And you just get a different level of understanding. And that idea, that combination of having like great independence in a different place, but having a secure, resource there for you to make you feel safer, just facilitates more of that. And then just something like dinners or something with folks who are local. Everywhere I've traveled, whether it's, Thailand or Ethiopia or other places in Southeast Asia, I've always somehow managed to find some local that I've hung out with. And, I've been here in the south of France having dinner at a professor's place in Villefranche. And it just gives you such a different flavor for what this place is like, and the commonality between people and the cultural differences that are interesting. And so the model, I just think, is one that more people should try, because it gives you freedom, gives you grounding, gives you a secure place. Like Airbnb, I mean, I'm not knocking Airbnb, but you don't know what you're going to get. Like, they don't have pre-vetting the way you do. You don't have a connection to a local resource. And so, like, is that story resonating with people now?
Yeah. I mean, we think that it's unique. The Untours, the core Untours product hasn't changed in 30 years, 40 years. It's really similar. The travel world has totally changed, right? Because now, and when Hal created this model, no one traveled this way. You couldn't stay in someone's apartment, in the back of their house or cottage here. Like, this wasn't a thing that was available. Now, of course, you can go online, you click a button, and it's easy to book something like that. And I would say in the early days of Airbnb, there was a lot of this like kind of more personal touches to it, and it's become commoditized now to where you've lost that, and you don't actually see the owners of these places almost never. And it's now agencies, and they're managing lots of properties, and like that's primarily what that world has become.
Well, it's interesting that Vrbo now is actually marketing on the basis that it's better you have no contact with anybody locally.
Yeah,
like I find that fascinating. Like, their model is don't connect with anybody locally.
Yeah, well, you don't have to have anyone in your space. Yeah, like I've seen those commercials.
Yeah,
which there's a place for that, I guess. And if you're at a beach or whatever, and you want to just have some private family time or whatever, but as you said, I think our travel styles are more similar in that we want to embed ourselves in a local community. So, but we think that the model, despite the fact that the world has been upended in how people travel, having a more curated, higher touch version of Airbnb, kind of the best ever Airbnb experience you could have, only it's guaranteed every time because you're paying for it, that is unique, and it really does resonate with people. And so we need it to resonate with more people, and we need more to know about it. That's the journey we're on now. Yeah. And we need to operationalize ourselves in such a way that we can do it efficiently enough to make some money as well. But that's it's unique in that the core product hasn't changed. The world has changed, and the core product is still as relevant today as it was 30 years ago. And that says something about the vision of Hal starting it.
So what are kind of apart from getting people to know, so you described it as it after Hal passed, like it went into a little bit of a hibernation period and is now emerging from it. What are the you as the leader who's taken this over, what are the core business challenges that you're tackling right now?
Yeah. What the leadership had done with Untours is like kind of manage the decline quite carefully. So sales went down, cut expenses appropriately so that you could not lose too much money. Sales went down, cut again appropriately. So it was very like a managed, steady decline. But that meant there was just huge amounts of like stuff that didn't get done because they didn't want to invest in anything because it was uncertain what the future was. And so the technology is 15 years old. Everything, like the website itself was 15 years old. All the technology underlying it in the booking process was I don't know, like a coding language that almost doesn't exist anymore. It's almost kind of non-existent. And like it was, and they had never been able to kind of get out ahead of it and change it. So the last year we spent like over a year redoing all the technology, redoing the website, which was the easy part. It's the tech underneath it, and the booking stuff was the hard part. Operationally, we had lost control of what was happening with our staff in Europe, and so invoices would come in, someone would write a check to pay the invoice. There was no kind of checking in between, and quality control had really almost gone out the window. And thankfully, the vast majority of our staff were amazing, and they were doing amazing work. But there was no kind of consistency across destinations. And so this is the work we're doing now of making sure we're abiding with local regulations, because the short-term rental Airbnb world has taken over. In many communities, the laws have changed, especially the bigger cities, to regulate or limit short-term rentals, because they're becoming a problem, because they're forcing out, they're making it too expensive to live there as a local resident, because it's more homeowners or apartment owners are wanting to rent to tourists instead of locals because they can make more money. And so there's in some places where we're outside of local regulations, where we're not living within the law of the land, and we didn't know it but we have to do this research and now figure out how do we maintain best practice, be a good actor as a company bringing tourists in. So a lot of that stuff had just fallen by the wayside because there was just not the capacity and investment in the capacity to take care of it. So it's been a lot of deferred maintenance that we've been cleaning up down to zero, hopefully, as far as kind of the beach in the basement of as low as we'll go, and then pushing our way out now. So as of a couple of weeks ago, we have the brand new website is live, and it looks fresh and clean, and the technology underneath it is solid and able to adapt to where we want to go in the future. And the staff has bought in for the most part, into a huge change in how we operate. But knowing that if we can
what's the big change in operations?
The biggest change is it's a bit of technicalities to the travel world, but it's how we manage bookings. So before, someone would book a specific date in a specific time in a specific place ahead of time, and they talk to one of our salespeople. Now our salespeople find them earlier on into their journey of exploration. And so we come in when there's an inquiry about someone who's thinking about traveling, and we help them find the right spot and the right destination and the right date and all of these things. So we can be a little higher touch earlier in the process. But that was a big change for our salespeople.
Yep. And you mentioned Europe a few times. You're not, for people who are interested in your model, you're not restricted to Europe now, though, right?
No. And in fact, we launched Costa Rica a few months ago. So in recent years, our first out of Europe destination. They had in years past tried a few things as well, but we're fully committed to being a global company, and we're just slowly making our way there. So we'll launch a few more, I think, kind of Latin Central America in the next year or so. We'll start to open up that market. Also, we had a dead season between November and March, because Europe has the same climate as here, and there's folks who are looking for travel in good weather. They were, we didn't have an option for them. So,
right.
So we've expanded our options, to really highlight some of the value of winter in Europe, which is not as many people, amazing Christmas markets, amazing, still some amazing experiences, but also finding some things near the tropics or in the southern hemisphere that in which our winter here in North America has better weather. So that's kind of the future we're going from a global perspective.
Nice. Now, last thing I want to ask you about, because it's an interesting challenge that not all businesses face, but to go from a business that's on a downward trend, and then to turn it around the other way. I mean, there are people who are called turnaround specialists, and one of the challenges in turnaround frequently, there's usually two of them. There's the obvious one, which is the financial, like how do you actually manage shift from a financial perspective when resources are tight. But the other is the human change management. Usually when a business is kind of on the skids, for lack of a better word, people start to get a little bit down. They can see the writing on the wall. They don't know what's happening. And so you can get kind of a malaise within the culture. How have you tackled that? How have you helped shift that, to the extent that was a problem, to get people, start to rowing hard again in the belief that things are going to get better?
I'm being totally honest, we're still in that process. But the things that we have done, we did add some new staff with lots of energy, with lots of smarts. They can come in and bring their own kind of historical skill set to the table but also just bring the energy and bring the positivity. That was hard. It's hard to have when you have a decade of decline. It's hard to show up with a positive mindset every day, you know.
Right.
And so we have brought in some new staff, and we've transitioned to be primarily a remote work environment. So all of our new hires are not local to Philadelphia, where we're based, and so we still have an office there, but our newer hires are around the world. But we did bring everyone together for the first ever work, remote meeting or retreat. And we went to Costa Rica.
An unretreat?
An unretreat, yes, whatever we want to call that. But we did it in Costa Rica in the fall, and because it was our newest destination as well. And it was a really amazing time of bringing people from around the world together. But also, we didn't talk strategic plan. We didn't talk technicalities of business or how we're going to sell more this or more that. Or what we talked about was the core history of the mission and moving that mission into the future. So not tying ourselves down to certain operational aspects, which had been in the past, but tying ourselves to the core values of the business and rallying around that, and then having that as a base to build off of. So that was how we spent our week together in Costa Rica, was just hanging out and doing fun things together, but also thinking about the values of the business and how we live those out in deep and profound ways, which will lead, we all believe, to profitability, which is not just making us all more money. It is also primarily making the foundation more money to go do its work, which everyone that works at the company is incredibly excited about. So that's the work we've been doing, is really trying to rally around that mission and vision that's always been there, and know that we got to do the brass tacks, like hard work to do it. The operational cleanup is not fun.
Right.
But we all know that this is like getting the fundamentals right is what's necessary to take the next step. But we have to, in order to get up every day and work on the fundamentals, we need to rally around the mission. And that's really, I've tried to lean into that as the leader, but also empower others to do the same and give space for that whenever we're together.
And what's to the extent you're comfortable, I don't want you to disclose, confidential stuff inside, but just from a human level, just people like me in the coaching world, right? Who sometimes I think peddle things like rainbows and kittens a little too much. That, when you just talk about mission and vision, people will rally behind it. But after a period of this, I would imagine there would be a level of cynicism that people would go, there'd be some eye rolling around focusing on mission and things like that. But long term, what I've always observed is when it's authentic and people do get to it, it does actually shift. And so there's two parts to what I want to explore on this with you. One is that bit about it isn't rainbows and kittens, but also that authentic persistence on that. Like, there's the counter cynicism is that mission stuff never matters and it's just doing business. But, my experience is over the longer term, it actually does provide a ton of foundational value.
Yeah. I think to your point, what I've tried to do and what we as a leadership team have tried to do is find the right balance. Because what we called last year, and it's floating to this year, we called last year the year of the fundamentals. Mm-hmm. So everyone has a big vision for how all the growth we can have, all the ways we can integrate more impact, more positive impact and good stuff into how we operate, into our operations. But we know that none of that works if we don't have just a solid business fundamentals, business kind of base underneath us. And so, the flowers and butterflies, I believe that it has to be there to help get through the hard days, because the hard days are necessary. But if it's just to make some dude in charge some more money, or maybe even to make yourself a bit more money, that is motivating. And we want to build that into our plan as well. That there's career growth, there's compensation growth. As we get this thing pulled around, there's opportunity as well for us as individuals. But then certainly, but that alone, if someone is working for that alone, then we're not the right place for them, because we don't want them to have to sacrifice career growth or sacrifice financial growth to work for us. But we also want them to legitimately care about the what we're trying to accomplish in the world.
Mhm.
And so I think we will continue to create space for that, to help us get through the hard days,
Yep.
and to make sure that we've got a team that can balance these things, because we're not going to maximize profit at all costs. We're going to make business decisions sometimes that are for the betterment of the world and not for the betterment of short-term financial realities. That is, some of the decisions we need to make, and we need buy-in across the board to be able to make those decisions. So from my perspective, it's a tough balance, but there needs to be space for both. You can't have too much of one or the other, but you can't be all rainbows and butterflies either, because then you, I don't know, then you don't have a business. You have a nonprofit, right? Back to the
Exactly.
The topic of earlier.
Yeah. Awesome. Listen, you've been really generous with your time. For people who are as fascinated as I am with this model, I'm seriously looking at the Costa Rica trip. I think it's brilliant. But for people who are interested in finding out about the joys of an Untour, where can they find you?
Yeah. www.untours.com. You see all the options there of the travel destinations. And looking at, I just last thing I'll do is give a bit of travel advice. Summer in Europe is crazy. It's fine, but it's just, I was just trying to help my parents. They're planning a trip. It's like they're planning in July. They can't get flights. It's too busy. Looking at like October, November, December in Europe is just really, really pleasant. You need to bring a jacket, but you can have really, really amazing experiences with fewer crowds, with better lodging options. So that's what I would recommend. Look at untours.com and start looking at your calendars for fall, early winter kind of timeline, and can be really, really cool for Europe travel. You're talking Costa Rica, then now you're starting to get into high season when you move into those times. But yeah, that would be my recommendation, is look at those off season or shoulder season times. And if you want an authentic experience, that's when people are home living their life, Yep. And so you're going to get more authenticity in those times as well.
Yeah, I remember traveling to Greece in the summer, and it was like it was hard to find a local except at a restaurant, because they're like, it's just inundated with tourists, and the locals are like, I'm getting out of Dodge.
Yeah. And I was just at our Greece. We send our Untour in Greece is this perfect little village on the coast. It's a bit touristy, but mostly just local folks who are there. But I was there in late February, early March. A perfect 60 degrees during the day. Need a jacket at night, maybe, and a perfect pace of life, because it wasn't so bustly with the tourists everywhere. Where you could really just go with the flow of daily life with the local residents in a way that it was totally different experience than yours in Greece in the summer. For sure.
Cool. Well, thank you. So that's awesome advice. Thanks very much, and I hope Untours continues its rise, because it's an awesome model. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to talking again soon.